The newest edition of the OEM preview bikes was just released to the public. This time the OEM team is providing you guys access to a KTM 250 and 450, an updated TM 125, as well as the addition of the Kawasaki 250 and 450 bikes. They are also including some work in progress tires for you to try out. All of these bikes come with what the OEM team is calling the secret sauce update that I must say completely changes the way these bikes handle and feel. I would like to run through a few specific topics like suspension, balance, tires, and at the end I'll talk specifically a little bit about how these changes affect the bikes in Supercross, not just outdoors. The suspension has had a huge overhaul, and I must say this is the best feeling suspension I have ever felt on any bike in MX bikes. The suspension out of the box with zero setups, by the way, feels extremely balanced while still giving a lot of feedback to the rider. It does this while still remaining fairly realistic. What I mean by that is you still won't be able to send a 120-foot jump out to flat, but that would be ridiculous anyway. But I will say that this new suspension does allow you to be a little bit more sendy. And through the last few days of testing the bikes, I have found myself going for a lot more of those, Deegan lines, if you will. If you have been playing MX bikes for any length of time, you know that it is really hard to turn and go through choppy, rough stuff at the same time. With this suspension, I have no issues with that at all. Some examples would be the S section on TFC's Ironman. In the aerial race, I found myself going all the way to the outside on every lap to avoid the risk of tucking my front when I apexed the inside corner. But on these bikes, I can hit that inside lap after lap with no issues. I think that the balance of these bikes is probably the biggest change, and this affects everything from slow physics, uphill physics, in-air physics, all the way down to how the bikes turn. Let's talk about turning for a little bit. The title of this video states that you will play the game different on these bikes, and I believe that this is the biggest area of change you will see in your playstyle. These work in progress bikes steer a lot different from the current public bikes. I find when I play the game like I have since the Beta 18 bikes were released, I find myself going over the last 15 to 20% of most of the berms. I have found that if I lean forward and slightly counter lean, it completely mitigates that issue. Or you have to slow down a little bit at the entry of the corner, either way. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these things don't turn. You can simply look at my controller overlay and see that it isn't that much of a difference, but it is something I had to adapt to, and I think you will too, especially if you are a faster player. I know that was kind of a lot, but to sum it up, I would say at times you need to treat the game a little bit more realistic, weight the outside peg, especially in those flat corners, and get your weight forward when you need to turn a little bit tighter. That's pretty much it. These balance changes also drastically improve slow physics. I mean, just look at this clip here. This would quite literally be impossible on the current public bikes. Scrubs and whips also feel a lot different on these new bikes. I've said it before in some of my TikToks, but these bikes feel extremely free. Almost like there was something resisting the player's input and almost fighting against the player on the previous public bikes. But these bikes feel extremely natural and just free. I feel like that's the best word choice for me to use. The lack of resistance is an incredible change, and it really makes you feel like you have a lot more control of the bike and that you can do things on these bikes that you couldn't do on previous bikes before. But this also brings another change where you have to be a bit more precise with your inputs. There were certainly instances in the past where if I wanted to scrub a jump really hard, I would just crank my sticks to the left or to the right and I would scrub as hard as possible. Now if you do that, you're either going to just 360 out of control, or you'll scrub solo where you'll hit your character on the ground and you'll crash. This is actually awesome in my opinion, because when you find that balance, I believe you can scrub significantly harder than you could before. Let's move on to the tires, and man, have these things been improved. The traction feels a lot more realistic, both in forward traction as well as the side-to-side traction. Previously, it felt like you either had 100% traction or 0% traction, and it was incredibly difficult to have an in-between. Now it feels like you can actually break traction, let the back end step out a little bit without doing a 180, and you can still keep that forward momentum. I also found that the rolling acceleration seems to be improved a lot. What I mean by that, a good example would be like, say you have a tight in corner into a double, triple in Supercross. Previously, at least for me, it felt like I would have a hard time getting that triple, because even if I was wide open, it either felt like the tire was just spinning or something, and I couldn't get enough forward drive to get over the triple. But now it seems like I'm able to do that a lot easier. Now, don't get me wrong, it's certainly not MX Sim where I can be at a standstill and hit a Supercross triple, but it is a huge improvement that I noticed right away, and I think you guys will notice it as well. Another area you'll notice the improved traction is on starts, even on Supercross on the grates, which I'm not sure if they affect traction. But anyway, starts are really good. You don't wheelie, you know the Honda, you dump the clutch, you do a wheelie? Yeah, not anymore. It doesn't do that. It's a large W. While we're on the topic of Supercross, I think that this year's Supercross season is going to be actually incredible. One of the biggest drawbacks to the previous year in Supercross was that there was really only like 2 bikes that could get through the whoops, over jump things without exploding, and that could jump into corners without, exploding. As someone who prefers Supercross in the game, I can say I've done a lot of testing in Soupy to see what bike I would like most for the upcoming season, and I can honestly say I believe everything I have ridden, which is basically all of the bikes, is genuinely viable. Every bike I have ridden has been able to get through the whoops, over jump stuff, and jump into corners. Of course, some bikes are going to excel in areas where others, don't excel, and that bike's going to excel where the other one did. But, they're all very good options. Oh yeah, also I'd like to point out that all of my testing has been done on completely stock setups. So with some changes to the setup, I think that bikes that weren't as viable in one area could certainly be, even the best. I don't know, setups make a big difference, especially in Supercross. So I think that really opens things up a lot. The OEM team has been absolutely grinding to get these bikes to a place where they are happy with, and I am extremely proud of the team as a whole, and I genuinely feel like these bikes are the best bikes I've seen in the game. I would encourage you guys to have a bit of an open mind when you're going into playing them for the first time, because even me, the first time I got on these things, I was like a little hesitant, and I don't know, after about 5-10 laps, I started to fall in love with them, and I realized, wow, like there has been something wrong, and this is the fix. So make sure you put some time into them and don't just, write them off if you feel uncomfortable in the first couple laps. Give them a shot. Lastly, make sure to head over to the OEM Supporter website, which you can find down below in the description, to get your hands on the KTM, TM, and Kawasaki preview bikes. I love you boys, and I'll see you in the next one. All right?